Celeste Monroe moved like a shadow through the crowded ballroom. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. The murmur of elite conversation filled the space. Waiters in crisp uniforms floated between guests, trays heavy with champagne flutes and caviar bites. Celeste blended in effortlessly, just another nameless server in a sea of polished faces. She adjusted the tray in her hands, her grip steady. Her uniform, black and pressed, fit perfectly. Her hair, tucked into a neat bun, concealed its natural waves. She kept her eyes lowered, her expression neutral. She had trained for this. She wasn't supposed to be here. The world believed Celeste Monroe had disappeared years ago. The daughter of a disgraced billionaire. The girl whose father's empire had crumbled overnight. Her name erased, her future stolen. But she was here, and she wasn't just serving drinks. She was hunting. Victor Langston stood at the center of the room. The billionaire, the king of finance, the man who had orchestrated her father's downfall. He was laughing, holding a glass of whiskey, surrounded by men who worshipped him. Power dripped from his every movement. His navy suit, sharp and custom-tailored, fit him like armor. His silver watch caught the light, a quiet display of his wealth. Celeste's hands tightened around her tray. She remembered the headlines. Langston Global acquires Monroe Enterprises in hostile takeover. She remembered the news footage. Her father, a once great businessman, exiting his office for the last time. His shoulders slumped, his face hollow. She remembered the moment she lost everything. Victor Langston had taken it all. And now, he was celebrating his latest victory. She moved closer, careful, silent. A businessman in a navy suit raised his hand for a drink. Celeste pivoted smoothly, offering the tray. He took a glass without looking at her. She continued, weaving through the room, watching, listening, every step calculated. Then, her phone vibrated in her pocket. A single buzz. Short, urgent. She stepped back, slipping behind a decorative column. She pulled the phone from her pocket, her pulse steady. A message blinked on the screen. He did worse than ruin your father. Check the vault. Midnight. Celeste's breath hitched. The vault. She had spent months gathering intel, learning everything about Victor Langston's world. His routine, his habits, his weaknesses. She knew he kept sensitive files locked away in a private vault inside his estate. No digital records. No cloud storage. Just paper. Hidden. Untouchable. Until now. She glanced up. Victor was still laughing, still unaware, but not for long. Tonight was the night it all began. Celeste didn't leave immediately. That would draw suspicion. She continued working, refilling drinks, clearing empty glasses. The hours ticked by. The guests grew bolder, their voices louder. Conversations blurred into meaningless noise. Then Victor left. He strolled toward the exit, his bodyguards falling into step behind him. His driver opened the door of a sleek black car. Within seconds, he was gone. Celeste slipped into the staff hallway. The air was cooler here, the noise muffled. She moved quickly, finding the locker room where the other waitstaff kept their things. She shrugged off her uniform jacket, revealing a dark hoodie underneath. The black pants stayed. Sensible, unnoticeable. She pulled her phone from her pocket and checked the time. 11:47 p.m. She had 13 minutes. The estate was across the city, a sprawling mansion with security meant to keep out the best. But Celeste had spent months planning, studying, preparing. She had a way in. She took the service exit, slipping into the night unnoticed. The Langston estate loomed ahead. 3 stories of glass, steel, and power. A fortress. Motion sensors lined the perimeter. Security cameras covered every angle. The guards patrolled in precise rotations. Celeste crouched in the shadows. She had memorized their movements, studied the blueprints. There was a blind spot near the western wall, a 15-second window. When the guards switched positions, she waited, counted, then she moved. A quick sprint across the lawn. Silent steps. She pressed against the cool stone of the mansion, her breath controlled. A maintenance panel was hidden behind the hedges. She pried it open, exposing the wiring. She worked fast, bypassing the security feed for exactly 60 seconds. A door clicked open. She slipped inside. The house was quiet. No music, no voices, just the low hum of distant electronics. Celeste moved through the hallways, sticking to the edges. She had memorized the layout. The vault was behind Victor's office, protected by biometric locks. She reached the door. A fingerprint scanner blinked red. Locked. Celeste pulled a small device from her pocket. She had lifted Victor's fingerprint weeks ago, imprinted on the rim of a whiskey glass. She pressed the thin film against the scanner. A pause. Then a soft click. She slipped inside. The vault was small but fortified. Steel walls. A single cabinet, locked with a keypad. No paper clips, no simple tricks. She pulled out her phone, activating the device Milo had built for her. It intercepted electronic signals, running through possible combinations. 9 seconds. The lock beeped. The cabinet door creaked open. Inside, folders. Dozens. Contracts, bank statements, records of off-the-books transactions, evidence of corruption, bribes, hidden accounts. Celeste's pulse quickened. She grabbed as much as she could, stuffing files into a small bag. Then she saw it. A single document. Thick paper. Her father's signature at the bottom. Her breath caught. She scanned the text. Her father hadn't just lost his company. He had been forced to sign it away under duress. The fine print revealed an impossible clause. Victor hadn't just taken Monroe Enterprises. He had taken everything. Every asset. Every patent. Even Celeste's inheritance. This wasn't just business. It was theft. The sound of footsteps snapped her back to the present. Someone was coming. She moved fast, shoving the last folder into her bag. She slipped out of the vault, closing the door just as the office light flicked on. A guard. He stepped inside, scanning the room. Celeste pressed herself into the shadows, heart pounding. The guard hesitated, then turned away. The moment he was gone, she moved. She retraced her steps through the mansion, silent, controlled. The security system was back online. She had 60 seconds before patrols reset. She reached the exit, slipped outside, ran. The night swallowed her whole. Celeste didn't stop moving until she was 3 blocks away. She ducked into an alley, her breath steadying. She pulled out the files, flipping through them. Every page was damning. Victor Langston wasn't just corrupt. He was a criminal. And now she had the proof. She pulled out her phone. A new message flashed on the screen. "Do you have it?" Celeste smirked. "Yes, and he's going to regret everything." Tonight had been a victory, but it was only the beginning. Victor Langston had no idea what was coming. Celeste Monroe was no longer just a waitress. She had spent months slipping into Victor Langston's world. She worked the highest profile events, memorized the guest list, and studied every move of the billionaire who stole her father's legacy. She blended in unnoticed. Another server, another shadow. But tonight was different. Victor was hosting an exclusive investors' party, an invitation-only event for his closest allies, men who controlled entire industries. Deals would be made. Secrets would be whispered. Celeste had worked her way onto the staff for one reason. She needed proof. Her black dress uniform was spotless. A silver tray rested in her hands. She moved through the crowd with precision, listening, watching. Every name, every glance, every conversation. She logged it all. Victor was at the center, laughing, a whiskey glass in hand. She had studied him long enough to know one thing. He trusted no one, but he also believed himself untouchable. That would be his mistake. She wove through the crowd, refilling glasses, dodging hands that reached too close. She made her way toward the back hallway, past security, slipping into the restricted area. No one stopped her. No one suspected her. Not yet. The office was locked. Of course it was. But Celeste had planned for that. She reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a key card she had swiped from an executive earlier. She slid it through the reader. A soft click. The door opened. She slipped inside. Victor's office was massive. Glass walls overlooked the city skyline. A mahogany desk sat at the center, sleek and polished. But Celeste wasn't here for the luxury. She was here for the vault. She crossed the room, knelt beside a steel cabinet, and pulled out a small device, a signal interceptor. She pressed it against the keypad. The numbers flickered. A few seconds passed. Then a beep. The cabinet unlocked. She opened it, scanning the files inside. Contracts, financial statements, offshore accounts. But then there it was, a black leather ledger. Thick, heavy. She flipped it open. Page after page of illegal transactions. Shell companies, bribery payments, laundered money. And then her father's name. Her stomach clenched. The truth was worse than she imagined. Victor hadn't just bought out Monroe Enterprises. He had fabricated evidence, created false debts, pushed her father into a corner until there was no way out. She snapped a quick photo of each page. Evidence. Proof. Then the door handle turned. Celeste moved fast. She shut the cabinet, slid the ledger back into place, and slipped behind a tall bookshelf just as the door swung open. Footsteps. Slow. Controlled. She held her breath. Victor Langston stepped inside. He walked to his desk, setting down his whiskey glass. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. He was alone. A phone rang. He answered. "Is it done?" His voice was low, calm. Celeste listened. A pause, then a chuckle. Good. Let him rot. He wasn't talking about a business rival. He was talking about her father. Her fingers curled into fists. She had heard enough. She moved, slipping toward the door, silent. But Victor turned. His eyes locked onto hers. For the first time, she saw it, the flicker of recognition. His lips parted slightly. Then realization clicked into place. "Celeste Monroe," he said, voice smooth as silk. "Well, well." She bolted. She shoved past him, sprinting down the hall. Security guards snapped to attention. Shouts filled the air. "Stop her." Celeste ran. Down the hall, through the service entrance. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. A guard lunged. She ducked, twisting past him. Another grab for her arm. She slammed a tray into his face, sending glasses shattering to the floor. She reached the main ballroom. The crowd barely noticed her at first. Then Victor's voice rang out. "Thief!" The word hit like a gunshot. All eyes turned to her. A wall of security closed in. Someone grabbed her wrist. A vice-like grip. She yanked away, but more hands followed. Too many. She fought, struggled, but it was over. The music stopped. Silence fell over the ballroom. Victor stepped forward, calm, smiling. "This woman," he announced, "was caught stealing from my office." Gasps, murmurs. Celeste's breath came fast. She shook her head. "That's a lie." Victor simply sighed. "Check her pockets." A guard patted her down. Then he pulled something out. A small flash drive. Celeste's stomach dropped. She didn't bring a flash drive. Victor took it from the guard, holding it up for the crowd. His eyes locked onto hers, cold and amused. "This contains sensitive company files," he said. Clearly, she intended to sell them. Lies. Celeste struggled, but the guards tightened their grip. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. A waiter. A thief. Victor stepped closer, lowered his voice so only she could hear. "You thought you were smart," he murmured, "but you were always just a waitress." She clenched her jaw, didn't speak. He turned back to the crowd. "I won't press charges," he said, ever the gracious billionaire. "But she will never work in this city again." The guests applauded. The guards dragged her toward the exit. She fought, but it was useless. Her world had just shattered. Again. Outside, the night was cold. The guards tossed her onto the pavement. The door slammed shut behind her. She sat there, stunned, hands trembling. The cameras would run the story by morning. She would be blacklisted. No job, no access, no credibility. Victor had played his move, and he had won. For now, she pushed herself up, wiped the blood from her lip. Victor Langston thought this was over. He was wrong. She wasn't broken. Not yet. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The pavement was cold beneath Celeste's hands. A sharp ache pulsed in her ribs where the security guards had shoved her to the ground. The grand doors of the Langston Tower slammed shut behind her. The golden letters of Langston Global gleamed under the city lights. Her hands curled into fists. People on the sidewalk slowed. Some stared. A few whispered. She could already imagine the headlines. Waitress caught stealing from billionaire Victor Langston. Thief exposed at elite gala. Scandal. Former heiress falls even lower. She clenched her teeth and stood. Shaky but standing. She reached into her pocket for her phone. No messages. No calls. No allies. Then her phone buzzed. She pulled it out. A single text. We need to talk. Now. 26th and Broadmoor. Come alone. No name. No number. Her pulse spiked. She looked up at the towering skyscrapers around her, half expecting to see someone watching. Nothing. Just the hum of the city. She had nothing left to lose. She went. The diner was nearly empty. Just flickering neon lights and the smell of burnt coffee. Celeste slid into a booth. Her hood pulled up. She scanned the room. Then, someone sat across from her. Gray hair. Deep lines on his face. A man she hadn't seen in years. Nathan Pierce. Her father's old business partner. Celeste tensed. Nathan leaned forward. I saw what happened. She scoffed. The whole world saw what happened. Nathan shook his head. This was planned. Celeste. Langston didn't just frame your father. He erased him. She frowned. I already know. No. Nathan cut in. His voice was tight. You don't. He slid a folder across the table. Thick. Worn. Celeste hesitated. Then opened it. Her heart stopped. Inside, bank records, contracts, hidden transactions. But the worst? The Monroe family trust. Gone. Her father's assets, investments, inheritance. Everything had been funneled into Langston Global. Stolen. Legally erased. Victor hadn't just destroyed her father's business. He had stolen her entire legacy. Celeste's breath came faster. This can't be real. Nathan exhaled. It's real. And Langston made sure you'd never find it. She gripped the folder, her knuckles white, the weight of everything pressed down on her. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was war. Celeste stood on the rooftop of a rundown motel, staring out at the city. The lights of Langston Global glowed in the distance. Her father had built something great. He had trusted the wrong man. And now, he was nothing. A ghost. A forgotten name. And Victor Langston sat on a throne made from stolen wealth. Celeste clenched her jaw. She could leave. Disappear. Run like she had after her father's fall. Or she could fight. She pulled out her phone. Dialed. A voice answered. Hello. She took a breath. Steady. Strong. We're taking Langston down. A pause. Then, I'm in. Celeste hung up. The war had just begun. A flickering neon sign buzzed above Celeste's head as she knocked on the rusted metal door. The air smelled like burnt circuits and stale energy drinks. A voice came through the intercom. Go away. Celeste knocked again. Silence. Then a long sigh. The door creaked open. Milo Gray stood in the doorway, unshaven, hoodie pulled over messy dark hair. His eyes flickered with recognition. Monroe? He leaned against the doorframe. Damn, thought you were dead. She stepped inside without an invitation. The apartment was a chaotic mess of wires, monitors, and half-eaten pizza boxes. Screens flickered with lines of code. I need your help, Celeste said. Milo plopped onto a swivel chair. Yeah, and I need $10 million and a beachfront mansion. He spun lazily. Guess neither of us are getting what we want. Celeste reached into her bag and tossed a file onto his desk. He barely glanced at it. What's this? Langston's dirty money. Offshore accounts. Shell companies. Everything you'd want to ruin a billionaire's life. Milo's fingers paused over his keyboard. His eyes finally met hers. And she leaned forward. I want in. A slow grin spread across his face. He drummed his fingers against the desk. Well, he mused. This just got interesting. The newsroom smelled like ink and cheap coffee. Papers covered every desk. Reporters moved in controlled chaos. Phones rang nonstop. Lucia Rivera sat at her desk, typing furiously. She didn't even look up when Celeste dropped a folder on top of her keyboard. "I'm busy," Lucia muttered. "You're going to want to see this." Lucia sighed, grabbing the folder. She flipped through it. Her eyes widened slightly. "Langston?" she said, finally looking up. Celeste nodded. Lucia shut the folder. "Yeah, no, not touching that." Celeste leaned in. "I thought you wanted a career-making story." Lucia scoffed. "I want a story, not a death sentence. You don't go after guys like Victor Langston and live to write the headline." Celeste slid a flash drive across the desk. Lucia stared at it, didn't move. "That," Celeste said, "is a recording of Victor Langston ordering someone's life destroyed. A man named Nathan Pierce." Lucia hesitated. Then she picked up the flash drive. "You just made my week," she muttered. Celeste smirked. "Good, because I need you to make Langston's life hell." Lucia inserted the drive into her laptop. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, cracking her knuckles. "That's the easy part." The prison gates clanked shut behind Celeste. Declan Ford sat on a bench in the visitor's yard, watching her approach. His orange jumpsuit was wrinkled, his sharp eyes scanning her with curiosity. Well, he drawled, "if it isn't the princess of a fallen kingdom." Celeste sat down across from him. "I need you." Declan smirked. "Sweetheart, I'm in prison." She slid a file across the table. Declan picked it up. His smirk faded. "These are sealed court records," he muttered. He flipped through the pages, jaw tightening. "Where the hell did you get these?" "I have my ways," Celeste said. "Victor set you up. You were never supposed to win that case." Declan's grip on the papers tightened. His eyes darkened. "So," Celeste continued, "do you want to rot in here, or do you want revenge?" Declan chuckled, low and bitter. "Darling," he said, "you had me at revenge." The plan moved fast. Milo hacked into Langston Global's email servers. One file leaked, just enough to stir the waters. Lucia published a small expose. Nothing massive, a whisper of corruption, just enough to make Victor sweat. Declan, newly released from prison thanks to a legal loophole, made calls to old allies. A few key people stopped answering Victor's calls. Victor felt it. The cracks in his empire had started to show. And Celeste? She was just getting started. Milo's fingers flew over the keyboard. Lines of code scrolled down his monitor. His apartment, dimly lit and cluttered with empty soda cans, hummed with the quiet buzz of machines running in the background. Celeste stood behind him, arms crossed. "How long?" "Relax," Milo muttered. "This isn't some high school hacking challenge." The screen blinked. A progress bar filled. And then, access granted. Milo grinned. "We're in." Celeste leaned forward. The financial records of Langston Global lay bare on the screen. Offshore accounts. Insider trading. A massive shell company scheme hidden across 3 continents. "Found it," Milo said, eyes scanning the numbers. "Langston's been shifting money into a fake real estate project in Dubai. Total fraud. If this gets out, his investors will panic." Celeste finished. Milo nodded. "Stocks will tank. The board will start asking questions." Celeste grabbed her phone. "Dial Lucia." "Go." Lucia didn't ask questions. She hung up. Within minutes, she uploaded a carefully crafted expose under pseudonym. Just enough to make waves. Just enough to make Langston sweat. By morning, headlines exploded. Billionaire Victor Langston accused of financial misconduct. Langston Global's Dubai project under scrutiny. Stocks plummet after anonymous leak. Celeste watched the news unfold from a dingy hotel room. She sipped her coffee, her lips curling into a smile. Let's see how the king reacts. The blow landed. Langston Global stock dropped 8% in a single day. Investors panicked. The board called an emergency meeting. The media circled like vultures. But Victor Langston wasn't a man who panicked. He picked up his phone. Within hours, the counterattack began. News anchors suddenly shifted the narrative. The Dubai project was misunderstood. A clerical error. A smear campaign by jealous competitors. Then the real hit came. Lucia's expose, traced back to her. Her name splashed across the internet. Reporters called her a fraud, a disgraced journalist fabricating evidence for revenge. But it didn't stop there. Celeste's face flooded the news. The same scandal Victor had framed her for at the gala resurfaced. Celeste Monroe, a serial liar? Disgraced heiress behind recent smear attack on Victor Langston. Monroe's revenge. How far would she go? Lucia called Celeste, her voice shaking. They're tearing me apart. Celeste clenched her jaw. Hold the line. But Victor wasn't done. Within hours, Celeste's accounts were frozen. Her motel room? Exposed. She barely had time to grab her things before reporters swarmed the building. Cameras flashing, microphones in her face. She escaped through the back alley. Hood pulled up. She had expected retaliation. But not like this. Victor Langston wasn't just fighting back. He was erasing her. Celeste regrouped in an abandoned warehouse, pacing as Milo and Declan argued. Lucia sat on an overturned crate, head in her hands. They buried me, she muttered. No one will hire me after this. Milo shook his head. This doesn't add up. They found you too fast. They hit back too precisely. Declan exhaled. We have a leak. Silence. Celeste's blood ran cold. She scanned the room. Milo, Lucia, Declan, one of them had betrayed her. She forced her voice steady. Who? No one answered. Then Milo's laptop pinged. A message. An encrypted signature from Langston Global's private server. Milo cracked in seconds. And the truth hit like a gunshot. A single message thread, sent from an anonymous source. To Victor Langston. Subject line. They're coming for the Dubai files. Lucia paled. No. Milo stood, his chair scraping against the floor. One of us sold out. Declan's gaze darkened. Lucia shook her head. I wouldn't. But Celeste wasn't listening. Her mind snapped into focus. The leak wasn't just an attack. It was a warning. Someone had given Victor their plan before it even started. Celeste took a slow breath. No more mistakes. She would find the traitor. And when she did, there would be no mercy. The air was thick, heavy. Celeste knew the feeling. She was being watched. She kept walking, sticking to the shadows, moving fast. The warehouse was compromised. She had to get to a safe house. Now. A black SUV crawled down the street behind her. Too slow, too controlled. She turned a corner, quickening her pace. The SUV turned with her. Shit. She ducked into an alley. Running now. Fast. Gunshot. A bullet slammed into the brick wall. Beside her, Celeste died behind a dumpster. Heart pounding. Breath sharp. Footsteps. Closer. Deliberate. She reached into her jacket. Fingers wrapping around a pocket knife. It wasn't much, but she wasn't dying here. Not tonight. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then tires screeched. A car door slammed. Someone ran toward her. A hand grabbed her wrist. She twisted, knife flashing. Whoa! Whoa! Milo's voice. She froze, chest heaving. Milo pulled her up. Get in the car. Now! No time for questions. She jumped into the passenger seat as bullets ripped through the windshield. Milo floored the gas. They sped into the night. Celeste stared out the window, fingers gripping the dashboard. Milo's hands were tight on the wheel. They sent a hitman. Celeste didn't respond. She exhaled. Victor Langston was done playing defense. Now he wanted her dead. She touched her side, feeling the sting of a graze. Her hands curled into fists. This wasn't over. Not even close. Victor thought he could erase her. He thought she would break. But he had just made his biggest mistake. Celeste wasn't running anymore. She was coming for him. The warehouse was empty. No Milo. No Lucia. No Declan. Celeste stood alone. staring at the overturned crates, the broken laptop screen still flickering. The air smelled like dust and burnt wiring. Papers were scattered across the floor. A chair lay on its side. They were gone. Her team gone. Lucia had disappeared first. No calls, no messages. Just a blank voicemail. Then Declan. Milo's last text had been 3 words. Get out now. She had nowhere left to go. She grabbed her bag and walked out the door. The second she stepped outside, the world erupted. Flashing red and blue lights. Sirens wailing. Cameras shoved in her face. Celeste Monroe. A reporter's voice cut through the chaos. Do you deny the charges? Are you responsible for missing funds? Did you really steal from Langston Global? Celeste's stomach dropped. What? Then she saw it. A giant screen on a newsstand flickered with breaking news. Celeste Monroe implicated in massive financial scandal. Her breath hitched. The words scrolled across the screen. Fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. Her face flashed next to Victor Langston's. But the difference? Victor looked calm, controlled, a businessman addressing the public. And Celeste? They had used her mugshot from the gala. Hair messy, eyes wild, a thief. Then, her bank account alerts flooded her phone. Frozen, seized, gone. Victor hadn't just fought back. He had erased her. A heavy hand grabbed her arm. Celeste Monroe? She didn't look. She already knew. Cops. She ran. She sprinted through the streets, weaving between cars, her lungs burning. Cameras followed her. Shouts echoed. The city was against her. She turned a corner. An alley. She climbed a fire escape, 2 steps at a time. A helicopter whirred above. They were hunting her. She reached the rooftop, heart hammering. No way forward. No escape. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. A low voice. 4th building down. Rooftop door is open. Move. Now. She didn't hesitate. She jumped. Celeste slammed the rooftop door behind her, breath ragged. The hallway was dark, empty. A figure stood at the end. Nathan Pierce, her father's old business partner, the one who had told her the truth about Victor. He stepped forward, holding a thick envelope. I told you this wasn't over. Celeste took it, tore it open. Her hand shook. It wasn't just proof that Victor had stolen her father's company. It was something bigger. An old contract. A name she didn't recognize. A sealed document from years ago. She looked up. What is this? Nathan's eyes were cold. It's your father's last move before Victor buried him. Celeste's grip tightened. This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was her last shot. Victor had won the battle, but she was about to win the war. Celeste sat in the dimly lit motel room. The old contract spread out in front of her. The paper was yellowed, the ink slightly faded, but the words were clear. A name, a signature, a mistake. Victor had buried this deal years ago, assuming no one would ever find it. He was wrong. Her father hadn't just lost Monroe Enterprises. He had been forced to sign it over under a fraudulent clause. The fine print revealed something bigger. Langston Global's entire foundation rested on a technicality that, if exposed, could bring the empire crashing down. Celeste's lips curled into a smile. She finally had her opening. Now, she needed to drive the knife deeper. Cracking the inner circle, Victor Langston ruled through fear. He surrounded himself with loyalists, people too afraid to turn on him. Celeste planned to change that. She started small. A whispered rumor here. A leaked document there. A well-placed call to the right people. She sent anonymous emails to Langston's board members. A warning. Victor is about to fall. Do you want to fall with him? At first, no one responded. Then, the cracks started to show. Eleanor Langston sat at the head of a long, polished boardroom table. CFO of Langston Global. Victor's sister. The woman who handled the money. She tapped her pen against the table, staring at the latest financial reports. Something wasn't adding up. The Dubai scandal had shaken investors. But now, stockholders were pulling out too fast. Her personal phone vibrated. a restricted number. She hesitated, then answered. "Who is this?" A disguised voice responded. "You know your brother is lying to you." Eleanor stiffened. "Excuse me?" A pause. Then an email notification appeared on her laptop. A single attachment, a copy of the contract. The loophole, the voice continued. "If this gets out, Langston Global collapses." Victor knew. He always knew. Eleanor's grip on the phone tightened. She had stood by Victor for years, helped him erase people. But this was different. This wasn't just business. This was survival. Victor Langston wasn't a man who doubted himself. That's why he didn't see it happening. Not at first. He sat in his penthouse, swirling a glass of whiskey, watching the stock market recover. He thought he had crushed Celeste Monroe. Then his phone rang. His banker. "Sir, we have a problem." Victor frowned. "Speak." The banker hesitated. "Our partners in Zurich are pulling out. They're citing legal concerns." Victor sat up. "What legal concerns?" A pause. Then the Monroe contract. The whiskey glass shattered in his hand. Victor bolted upright, his heart pounding. "Who has it?" Silence. Then the words that changed everything. "Sir, I think your sister does." Eleanor ignored Victor's calls. For the first time in her life, she was afraid of him. He knew. And when Victor Langston got desperate, he got dangerous. Celeste watched from the shadows, waiting. Victor wasn't invincible. He wasn't untouchable. He was bleeding, and she was about to go for the throat. Celeste stood in the center of a quiet boardroom, surrounded by glass walls that overlooked the city. The contract sat on the table in front of her, thick with legal jargon, numbers, and signatures waiting to be signed. This wasn't just a document. It was a weapon. She had spent weeks crafting it, disguised as a routine merger agreement between Langston Global and a shell corporation. On the surface, it looked like a strategic investment. Profitable, safe, but hidden deep in the clauses, buried beneath the fine print, was a kill shot. The moment Victor signed, he would no longer own Langston Global. Celeste exhaled. One step left. She needed Victor to walk into the trap himself. Victor Langston stared at the proposal, his fingers tapping against a marble table in his penthouse office. Across from him, Eleanor Langston sat stiffly, her expression unreadable. Victor glanced up. "You're sure about this?" Eleanor nodded. "It's airtight. The investors are expecting your approval." Victor leaned back. Something about this felt too easy. But he was still in control. He had buried Celeste Monroe. He had crushed every attack. And if this merger strengthened his hold on the company, why not? He reached for the pen, signed his name. The moment the ink hit the paper, everything changed. Victor's assistant rushed into the office, eyes wide. "Sir, we have a—" The boardroom doors burst open. A team of lawyers flooded inside. Reporters followed. Camera crews. Live streaming. Victor stood so fast his chair tipped over. "What the hell is this?" Eleanor remained seated. Calm. Celeste stepped through the crowd. Victor's eyes went dark. "You." Celeste smiled. "Me." She dropped the folder onto the table. The real contract. Victor grabbed it. His eyes scanned the words. His own signature stared back at him. His hands clenched the pages. The blood drained from his face. "No," he whispered. Langston Global was no longer his. He had just signed it away. A camera crew pushed forward. A news anchor spoke directly into the live broadcast. "We are here live at Langston Global, where a shocking development has just unfolded. CEO Victor Langston has unknowingly relinquished control of his own company." Victor slammed his hands on the table. "Shut them down. Now." No one moved. Security guards stood frozen, waiting for orders from Eleanor. Eleanor turned her back on him. She nodded to the board members. Effective immediately, Victor Langston is removed as CEO. Victor laughed, sharp and bitter. "You think you can do this?" Eleanor met his gaze. "I already did." Victor lunged forward, but security grabbed him. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters shouted. Then the final blow. On the massive TV screens outside Langston Global, a news report played live. Celeste had leaked everything: fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, bribery. Victor Langston's sins exposed to the world. The reporters turned back to him. "Mr. Langston, do you have any comment?" Victor shoved them aside. He ran. Victor burst into the lobby. Security blocked every exit. Outside, crowds gathered. The world watched. Then sirens, red and blue lights reflected off the glass walls. FBI agents stormed the building. One stepped forward, badge in hand. "Victor Langston, you're under arrest." Victor stopped moving. For the first time in his life, he had lost. The cuffs snapped around his wrists. The cameras didn't look away. Celeste watched as they dragged him outside. Victor turned, eyes locking onto hers. Pure fury, pure hatred. She just smiled. This time, she had won. Victor Langston stormed into boardroom, his footsteps heavy, his jaw clenched. His own company, his own building, and yet every single person at the table refused to meet his eyes. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, calm, collected. The rest of the board members sat stiffly waiting. Victor slammed his fists against the table. "What the hell is this?" Eleanor folded her hands. "A vote." Victor's fingers twitched. "I own this company." "No," Eleanor corrected. "You did." A folder slid across the table. The same contract. The one he had signed. His own signature glared back at him. His stomach dropped. "You tricked me," he growled. Eleanor lifted a brow. "You signed the papers, Victor." The board remained silent. They had already made their choice. Victor turned to them, desperate now. "I built this empire." His voice cracked. "And you're just going to hand it over? After everything I've done for you?" No one spoke. Then the vote was cast. Unanimous. Victor Langston was officially removed as CEO. The doors burst open. FBI agents flooded the room. Suits, badges, guns drawn. Victor froze. One agent stepped forward. "Victor Langston, you're under arrest." The words rang out like a gunshot. The board members shifted uncomfortably. None of them would speak for him now. None of them would save him. Victor raised his hands. "This is ridiculous." His voice was still strong, still smooth. "You have nothing on me." The agent tossed a thick file onto the table. Evidence: fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, racketeering. Victor's face drained of color. The agent grabbed his wrists. The cold metal of handcuffs snapped into place. Victor jerked back. "I can fix this." He turned to Eleanor, to the board, to anyone who would listen. No one did. The cameras were rolling. The world was watching. Victor Langston, the king of corporate power, was dragged from his own empire in handcuffs. The stock market reacted instantly. Langston Global plummeted. Investors fled. Every secret, every crime Celeste had exposed, spread across the financial world like wildfire. The Langston name was poison. Banks pulled out. International deals collapsed. Executives resigned overnight. One by one, his allies scattered. The men who once shook Victor's hand now pretended they had never met him. The empire crumbled, and Celeste watched every second of it. Outside, the city lights glowed. Celeste stood by the window of a high-rise overlooking what used to be Victor's world. A news broadcast played behind her. Victor Langston, once one of the most powerful men in corporate America, now faces a federal trial. Prosecutors are pushing for the maximum sentence. She exhaled. She had done it. She had ripped everything away from him, the same way he had ripped everything from her father. And now, Victor Langston was nothing, just another criminal, just another fallen king. Celeste took one last look at the city. Then she turned away. Victor was finished. And she was just getting started. Victor Langston sat in a cold, gray interrogation room. The handcuffs were gone, but the cameras weren't. Across from him, a federal prosecutor read off a list of charges: fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, insider trading, money laundering. The list went on. His lawyer sat beside him, silent. There was no defense. The evidence was ironclad. His bank accounts? Frozen. Offshore holdings? Seized. The billions he had used to buy power, control people, erase enemies? Gone. The empire he built? Dismantled. He had nothing left. But the worst part? Celeste Monroe was the one who did it. Eleanor Langston had always been careful, smarter than Victor. She had seen the downfall coming and planned her exit. Before the board voted Victor out, before the Fed stormed the building, she wired her fortune offshore. A private jet, a fake identity, a one-way ticket to a country with no extradition. She thought she had won, until she landed. She stepped off the plane, dressed in expensive sunglasses and a silk scarf, ready to disappear. Then, a voice. Going somewhere? Eleanor's blood ran cold. She turned. Celeste stood there, waiting. Behind her, Interpol agents move in. Eleanor barely had time to react before they grabbed her. "Nice try," Celeste said. Eleanor screamed as they dragged her away. She wouldn't escape. Not this time. The courtroom was packed. Celeste sat in the front row as the judge read the final ruling. All charges against William Monroe are officially expunged. The court recognizes that his assets were wrongfully seized and his reputation unjustly tarnished. The words hit like a hammer. Celeste's father, once a powerful businessman, then a man the world had forgotten, was finally vindicated. The media reported it instantly. The financial world ate itself alive, trying to rewrite history. The same people who had once mocked the Monroe name now rushed to celebrate it. But Celeste didn't care about them. She cared about the one thing that mattered. She had kept her promise. Her father's legacy was his again. The prison was silent. Victor Langston sat in a steel chair, staring at the wall. The door opened. Footsteps. Someone sat across from him. He didn't look up, but he knew who it was. Celeste Monroe. She placed something on the table. A gold-plated pen. The same one Victor had used to sign away her father's company. Victor's fingers twitched. His fury burned beneath the surface. "You think this is over?" His voice was low, bitter. Celeste leaned forward, eyes cold. "Oh, it is. You just haven't accepted it yet." Victor's jaw clenched. She stood, done with him. "You told me once that business is war," she said. She turned, walking toward the door. Before she left, she glanced over her shoulder. "You lost." Then she walked away. Victor never saw her again, but he would never forget. The papers sat in front of her. Thick, heavy, worth billions. Celeste Monroe sat at the head of the boardroom table. Victor's old seat, the remnants of Langston Global's leadership, sat across from her, waiting, nervous. She could take it. She had won. Victor's empire was hers for the taking. A former board member cleared his throat. "Miss Monroe, with Victor removed, we need leadership. Your father built a legacy once. You could restore it." Celeste ran her fingers across the contract. Langston Global's future in her hands. Then she smiled and pushed the papers away. "Find someone else." Silence. Shock. "Excuse me." Celeste stood, unshaken, uninterested. "I didn't destroy Victor just to replace him." She turned to the window, staring out over the city. Langston Global would fade. Let the board fight over the scraps. She had bigger plans. Celeste built something new. Not a corporate giant. Not another empire of greed. She created Monroe Equity, a firm that helped the businesses Victor had crushed. A second chance for people like her father. She invested in the forgotten, the underestimated. And one by one, she made them powerful. She didn't need Victor's empire. She was building her own. And this time, no one would take it from her. The prison air was stale. Victor Langston sat behind bulletproof glass, his once pristine suit replaced by a dull orange jumpsuit. He didn't speak. When Celeste sat across from him, she placed something on the table. A gold-plated pen. The same one he had used to sign away her father's life. The same one she had taken from his office the night she stole his company. Victor's eyes flickered to it, tensed. Celeste smiled. "Thought you might need this," she said. Victor didn't move, didn't speak. His power was gone, his legacy erased. Celeste stood, unbothered, untouchable, and as she walked away, she wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't a victim. She was in control. And this was just the beginning.